Good evening, I'm David Nicholas, and next on CMU Public Television, a Mid-Michigan lawmaker elected to a second term this past November as we sit down with Tom Leonard next on Capitol Report.
Welcome to Capitol Report, a weekly discussion with your elected officials on the issues and concerns that affect you.
My guest this week won re-election to a second term this past November to represent the 93rd District. This covers Clinton County and portions of Gratiot County. Congratulations on that re-election, Representative Leonard, and welcome back to Capitol Report.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it very much, and thank you for having me here today.
As we sit down this morning, the legislature is going into its spring recess, and during the break, the merger of the State Department of Community Health and Department of Human Services will go into effect, that as of April 10th. Just prior to the recess, Democratic Representative Harry Yanez introduced a motion to hold off on that. More or less, I guess now a symbolic gesture since there's no special session anticipated. So to the question of the governor's action on this, saying that it will provide more efficiency and a degree of savings in state government, your view, does this merger accomplish that?
I'm going to support it, and I hope that it does. I don't claim to be an expert on DCH or DHS, but one thing I was very excited to hear the governor talk about, particularly in his State of the State address, is that we have to start concentrating on people and not programs. We've got to make this system more efficient, more effective, and we've got a lot of people who have to go through both departments to get a lot of the services that they need. And his hope, and my hope through listening to him, is that by merging these two departments together, we can streamline this system, and the big savings hopefully will be down the road. We can get people more towards dependence. We can make certain, again, that they're getting the services that they need today, streamline the system, getting them out more on dependence, and again, focusing on people, not on programs. And I'm proud to hear the governor talk about that.
And as you say, more of the savings perhaps coming down the road as Lansing is facing the budget shortfalls several years out with the claims to the job creation tax credits. Where are all of you beginning to look for potential other savings and or efficiencies when it comes to state government as a whole?
Well, very good question, and I'm glad that you brought up the tax credit situation, because this is certainly something that needs to be addressed. This caught me by surprise this year when I found out that we had this deficit. The state constitutionally has to have a balanced budget, and every 3 to 4 months there is folks come together, we look at the budget, and if it's out of whack, then we've got to fix it. And we found out this year that we were running a $500 million budget deficit. You ask, how could that be? Well, what had happened was, over the course of the last 12 years, started around 2000 and went through 2010, our state government gave out about $9.3 billion in tax credits or tax subsidies. And the issue was, these tax credits or these subsidies, they were basically giving to mainly the big three, but there were other companies as well. They received these subsidies, and basically if they were to hire a certain amount of employees and pay them a certain amount of money, they were qualified to come to the state treasury, turn in these tax credits or these subsidies, and the state would give them money out of the treasury. Well, for 10 years, as you know, we were in a single state recession. These companies could not hit those target marks. So many people have asked, how is it that the economy is improving, unemployment's going down, jobs are being created, yet we have a budget deficit? That's usually when we have a recession. Well, what's happening is now, because the economy is improving, these companies are finally starting to hit their targets, and these credits, they were extended through 2032. And again, $9.3 billion of these credits are out there right now. And what's happening is they're hitting their targets, and now they're coming to the Treasury, and they're expecting their payments. And again, $9.3 billion of these out there. We could be seeing $500 million of these going out every year. So I'm glad that the House Republicans, we took the lead on this issue very quickly. Within 2 weeks, we wiped out this budget deficit, but it's going to be a problem going forward, and something we're certainly going to have to talk, again, with the big three, with other companies that have received these credits, and see if we can't renegotiate some of these, because it's going to be a problem on our budget going forward.
You said potentially shortfalls in that range that could be for these several years to come. now that we know, and that's been some of the complaint, is that there wasn't necessarily, the Treasury wasn't making it public knowledge that all of a sudden, as they say, the bill was going to come due. How much advanced planning? We've got to deal with it obviously now in the shortfall. We've gone into the surplus funds to take care of the deficit, but in terms of moving forward, how do we begin to potentially address budget shortages in that range for that many years out?
Absolutely. Again, if we can get those companies to come to the table and renegotiate some of those contracts, that would be wonderful. At minimum, I think the least we can do is perhaps have them renegotiate the contract such that maybe we're not taking away their credit, but having them give us certainty as to knowing when they're going to cash these in. Again, as soon as they hit their benchmarks, my understanding is they could cash these in at any time. We want to make sure that next year they don't cash these things in to the tune of $2 billion or $1.5 billion, even $3 billion. We want to make sure that we can plan going forward. So I think the least that we can do is get them to come to the table and perhaps renegotiate at least when they plan to turn these tax credits in. Because again, if we get hit with $1 billion bill next year, it's really going to put a strain on our budget. It put a strain on our budget this year. If it was not for economic growth right now in an improving economy, I don't know what we would have done.
With the surplus funds, though, being tapped into, there were the complaints that any surplus should be going back to things such as the K-12 school budget and the like. How much will it take now to rebound, not only to meet the credits that are being due, but maybe to get some money back into those surplus funds or those rainy day funds and get those back up to a level that we want for security moving forward? Yeah,
well, the rainy day fund, we've done great with that. When Governor Snyder took office in 2011, we had right around $1 million left in our rainy day fund. That was only enough money to keep the government running for about 30 minutes in the event of a disaster. I believe now we're up to about $500 million. And that includes the Detroit payment we used for the Detroit bankruptcy settlement that the state took part in. In regards to education funding, we are going to continue to make certain that education is a priority. As our economy improves, a lot of education funding is predicated on the sales tax and sales tax revenue. And as we have a good economy, people will continue to buy. Sales tax revenue will go up. Since Governor Snyder took office, state funding for education has gone from $10.8 billion his first fiscal year to this year his recommendation is $12 billion. So that's about a $1.2 billion increase. One of the issues that we have with education funding, and one of my top priorities, is actually MIPSers, or teacher retirement reform. Right now, most teachers are still in a defined benefit system. This year alone, the governor's recommendation, we would be paying out over $900 million, so almost $1 billion, just to cover teacher retirement costs that are above 26% of the payroll. So if you do the math on that, we could be looking at $3 to $4 billion a year going into teacher retirements. If we could get them into a defined contribution system, much like other state employees did back in 1997, we could lower those costs and we could get a lot more money back into the classroom.
Where does that effort stand? Because that has been, as I'm sure you know and the audience knows, that's been the criticism, two sides to the issue where the contention is made by the governor's office that the education funding has gone up, and yes, there's been additional money, but of course those that wanted to see more go directly to the classroom as opposed to dealing with potentially meeting the needs and the demands that will be there with a teacher pension fund. Where do we stand at reaching more of that balance that you talked about?
Again, I'm hoping the conversation will start more this year. I know that there was some reform that was put in place a couple years ago. There was some other reform talked about, and unfortunately that died. It did not make it through, but I'm hoping we can start that conversation again this year. The House Republicans, a couple months ago, we released our action plan with 80 action items in that plan, things that we want to accomplish. And pension reform was one of the things that's in there. And again, this is something that we have to address. And I think folks, now that they're starting to see, I wouldn't call it a crisis, but it's getting serious, I think more folks are starting to talk about it. I talked to you about that pension paydown, or the state paydown, being over $900 million this year. That's $200 million more than it was last year. So again, that is approaching $1 billion this year in the governor's recommendation, and that's only to cover the pension costs above 26% of the payroll. The first 26%, I'm not even talking about. The local school districts take care of that money. So what we're covering just above 26% is $1 billion. So again, education funding is up to the tune of $1.2 billion. it is true that we are seeing less money go to the classroom, but again, the retirement systems are eating up a lot of this money, as well as one of the things that a lot of folks don't talk about is federal funding for education has gone down every year over the last 4 to 5 years. I believe this year we're going to see a $30 million cut from the federal government. So the state continues to put money into education, but unfortunately, those retirement systems and the lack of federal funding, with federal funding going down, you're seeing that strain.
Another issue when it comes to schools, the issue of transparency, ongoing calls for that, including the charter schools and charter authorizers. There's another move on this, a closer look potentially, as we learned this week, at what kinds of information is required of schools and the level of reporting when it comes to not only the way they do their business, but the financial picture as a whole. It probably could be quickly into something that might get a little bit on the confusing side. What should the standard be? How much of a level of reporting when it comes to avoiding financial crisis? What's your view on where we stand on what the schools are required to do and potentially could be required to do?
Absolutely. Transparent and accountable government has to be a top priority for us. In the House, we actually, if you go to our House website, you will see that every single employee's salary and benefits is online for the world to see. We need to have more transparency for any group, whether it be a school, local unit of government that's taking taxpayer dollars. We also need to demand high standards in terms of educating our children. Certainly the conversation is going to continue. The teachers that I have spoken to, and I will tell you this is not to be negative teacher, because most of the teachers that I have spoken with, they are great teachers. I was in a classroom yesterday reading to a group of kindergartners. I spent half my day touring the Pewamo Westphalia School District. Excellent teachers, excellent standards there. But one of the common themes that I continue to hear is guys, you've got to give us the benchmarks. You've got to tell us what it is that you want us to do so that we can achieve those. They can't keep changing every year. So whatever system we finally come up with, we've got to put something in place, and we've got to leave it there for a while so that our superintendents, our principals, and our teachers, they can shoot for those benchmarks without having to change it up the following year.
Another one of the priorities of the governor is now the State Department of Workforce Development. The House Speaker Kevin Cotter created a committee that's taking the thoughts from employers. Where has Michigan fallen short in having workers ready to move into a changing economy to the point where we now have a legislative committee, that we now have a newly created State Department and the like to address this? Yeah,
in my opinion, one of the places we have really failed, and we've worked diligently to improve this the last couple of years, and again, this is in our action plan, is with skilled trades or vocational education training. We have got to prepare our young men and women for these skilled trades jobs, and not just prepare them for those jobs, but also educate and let the world know these are very good, great paying jobs. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I met with Jim Byram. He is the president of the Michigan Agribusiness Association, and he had one of his members. He was telling me a story. They had 2 job postings. One was for a computer programmer. It was going to pay $35,000 a year, required a 4-year education, and was going to have health benefits along with it. They had over 100 people apply for that position. That same person also had a job posting for a welder. It required a welding certification. It was going to pay over $60,000 a year. So you're looking at nearly double of what the computer programmer was going to pay. They only had 2 people apply for that position because we've got such a lack of welders here in our state. So, and it's not just welding. I've spoken to mechanics. I've spoken to electricians. We need to prepare our young men and women for the skilled trades. And a couple things we can do to address this. One is by addressing our merit curriculum, giving more option, giving more choice for students and their parents, as well as preparing our veterans when they come home. I was shocked to find out that many of our veterans, when they come home, they may spend years working on a submarine, working on the wires or the electronics or what have you, working on boilers. They come home and they are not certified because they don't meet Michigan requirements. So we're revamping a lot of those requirements and basically saying, hey, if you're good enough to work on a submarine for 4 years and you defended our country, when you come back to our great state, you should be able to work. You shouldn't have to jump through a bunch of hoops. Representative Tom Barrett, who's one of our serving members right now, he's in the National Guard. He flies Black Hawk helicopters. Last week, we actually passed a bill in the House that would help those people that are qualified to work on boilers. When they come back to Michigan, those veterans, when they're done with their active duty, they can come and they can get a job. So again, skilled trades, that's something that I think we've lacked on. We really need to work, continue to move forward on that, particularly with our veterans.
There is bonded money, around $50 million, that's going to 18 of Michigan's 22 community colleges. We already have a network of Michigan Works offices that do workforce development. That money going to those, and then also, and you mentioned the vocational training, and it has been sort of a varied message from the guests on this program as to the nature of those programs, the status of those programs, if you will, in individual districts, as to whether or not the schools have been able to maintain vocational training programs to give high school students that head start. With all those things, and I guess focusing in on your district, what is the state of the vocational training that you find immediately in District 93?
I would say certainly good. I've got Lansing Community College, which is very close to my district. My district is all of Clinton County and then most of Gratiot County. And Breckenridge is the furthest area, I guess, in my district from Lansing Community College. So yes, it would be a commute, but within an hour driving distance would be the furthest, again, the furthest distance in my district to a community college. We did support a bill last year, I believe that was signed into law by the governor. And Dave, it may have passed 110-0. It was one of those, it was a bipartisan bill, but basically allowed for increased funding and increased public-private partnerships with our community colleges and with our business. I believe the best way to really facilitate this type of training is going to be through our community colleges.
With the creation of the prosperity zones and looking at how money, economic development money may be going to different areas of the state, looking again at the network that Michigan Works already has in place, where many counties already had an existing office, how are we shaping where the money is being spent, where those priorities are? And it kind of comes under the umbrella overall of this as a true budget priority moving forward, making sure that we have that skilled workforce.
Yes, absolutely. And in my opinion, I don't believe promise zones is necessarily the way to go. I've had an issue with a lot of these zones that we carve out and we say this individual may get a tax reduction or may not. I believe it's got to be more broad, which is much like the program that I was talking about earlier. When the Community College Association came to speak to me about that, one of my first questions was, will every employer qualify for this equally? Whatever their skilled trade is, I want to make certain we're not picking and choosing winners and losers. I want to make sure it's not just plumbers or not just electricians or just mechanics. I want to make sure that everybody qualifies. And those are the types of programs, again, that I think we need to look at. One that applies across the spectrum. And again, through our community colleges, I think is a great way to do that. But as long as it applies equally, I'm a big fan of it.
When it comes to budget priorities, one of the largest in the state budget is for the Department of Corrections. The cost-saving move to contract with Aramark has had a number of incidents calling that deal into question as they've worked to streamline that and deal with those. What other reviews or possible reductions could there be for corrections and in the area of addressing the overall topic of public safety?
Yes, and the issue with Aramark, or the issues we've had with Aramark, it has been troubling. But I will say this, I worked for the Attorney General's office before I was elected, and actually my job was to protect or defend our corrections officers against the inmates when they were sued. So I don't think it's fair to say that only Aramark has problems. We had problems within the Department of Corrections as well. However, what I've been saying is if we're really going to lower prison costs, we've got to think outside the box. And what I've said is we've got to get to these people, criminals before, or pre-criminals, if you will, before they ever find their way into prison. I was proud a couple years ago when Speaker Cotter actually introduced legislation to expand treatment or mental health courts in the state of Michigan. I was proud to co-sponsor those bills. I was actually, my first job out of law school was clerking for the probate judge in Genesee County. Her name is Jenny Barkey. And she started the pilot program for the mental health courts in Michigan. I'll be the first to tell you, I was probably one of the biggest naysayers in the world. I never thought that this mental health court would pan out. And she continued to tell me, she would call me kid at the time, and she continued to tell me, kid, this is going to work. I promise you it's going to work. I'll never forget when a gentleman by the name of Ray Fulham came in. And Ray had entered into the mental health court, and he had committed a very minor crime. But the point of the health court was, or the mental health court was, to get them into the system and get them the help and treatment they needed before they progressed to a more violent crime. And I remember she had a courtroom full of people, and she said, who thinks Ray's going to make it through the program? And I was the only person who didn't raise my hand. And she looked at him, and she looked at me, and she said, well, Mr. Fulham, she said, we're going to prove Mr. Leonard wrong. And a year later, I had a job, I then went on to be a prosecutor. And I was working on one of my cases. Judge Barkey gave me a phone call, and she said, well, I need you tomorrow in court. And I said, what's going on? And she said, you better be there for Mr. Fulham's graduation because he made it. And I went into that courtroom. I was so proud of this gentleman. I recently spoke to her, and she said she's got 80 to 85 people in her program. These are people that are getting help. They're getting the treatment they need. They're getting on medication. When somebody goes into the prison system, the average cost for an inmate goes from $40,000 to $120,000 per inmate if they have a mental health issue when they go into prison. That's what we need to do. We need to think outside the box. We need to get people with mental health issues the help they need beforehand so that they don't find themselves in prison costing us $120,000 a year.
You are currently serving as the chair of the Committee on Insurance. Last year there was the call to reduce the cap on Michigan's catastrophic claims. Are there other issues when it comes to Michigan's no-fault auto insurance on the horizon? The buzz from that seemed to kind of die down, but where do we stand in terms of insurance reforms?
It did. In November, shortly after I won my re-election, I had worked with Speaker Cotter on House leadership, and I was fortunate to be elected Speaker Pro Tem of the House of Representatives. And a lot of times the Pro Tem will help the Speaker in the day-to-day management with the caucus and with the members. And I told the Speaker at the time, I said, Kevin, I said, the one thing I want to do, I said, I want to chair the Insurance Committee. And I really want to take a stab at reforming the auto no-fault system here in Michigan. David, it's out of control. People, it's breaking the backs of our hardworking citizens. They can no longer afford it. A study just came out a couple weeks ago and confirmed that we have the highest insurance rates or the highest insurance premiums in the country at average of $2,500 per premium. If you go to Detroit, $4,000 per premium. We've got a quarter of our drivers driving around uninsured. Half of the drivers in Detroit are driving around uninsured. And certainly something we need to address. Over the last 3 months, I've tried my best to be a consensus builder on this issue. I have found it's much easier or it's much better for the system if a bill sponsor works with both sides of an issue and tries to get both of them to compromise and come together on an agreement before a bill is introduced. And that's what I've been doing over the last 3 months. We're making some progress to try to lower those insurance rates. We'll see how it goes, but certainly something we want to take action on within the next few months.
A couple of moments left, and we want to touch on an issue that we brought up in just about all of our programs this season, the issue of the roads. The ballot proposal, the deadline for registration actually will be as of yesterday when folks catch up with our discussion today. And of course it is highlighted by Proposal 1. Your thoughts? You drive in a district with roads. That's not news to anyone,
yes.
But what are folks telling you about the status of the roads and how they feel with this proposal on the table?
I do. This is by far the biggest issue on everybody's minds right now. I had a teletown hall last night, and we had hundreds of people on, and this is where I sit in my office. We send calls out to people in the district. They call in, and they speak to us about what's on their minds. And by far, roads was the absolute #1 issue. As you know, Proposal 1 will be on the ballot here in the next month or so for the citizens to decide. I personally, in December, I did vote against the proposal. I had serious concerns about a $2 billion tax increase and only 58% of the money going towards the roads and the other money going to other places. I also wanted to see more reforms put in place. As I told you about the teacher retirement reforms earlier, we've got the same issues with local units of government and county road commissions. Our long-term debt and liability costs for local units of government in just the past 15 years has gone from $30.1 billion to $46 billion. So we've got to get serious about reforms if we're going to fix the road or the roads and continue to make certain that our budget is balanced going forward.
In just the few moments then that we would have, is there would there be a better option, the plan B, as it were, and we've asked folks this, should it not pass, and we don't want to place any value judgment or take a position on that, but what would be the potential backup, either from the House side or what you're hearing from the Senate side, as to an alternative, maybe more reforms, as you noted, or some other funding mechanism?
Yes, absolutely. I've been saying all along since this passed that even though I voted no, I do believe it's due its day in court, if you will. So this proposal, it needs to go forward. The people do need to decide. The House did pass 2 proposals last term. Both were revenue neutral. One was about a $500 to $600 million plan, and the other was the full $1.2 billion plan. Both were revenue neutral. The second one would have affected the school aid fund. Now, it wouldn't have lowered what goes into the school aid fund, but the actual increase over the course of 6 years would have been about $1.5 billion versus $2.5 billion. So many were saying that that House proposal would have been a cut to the school aid fund. That's kind of DC math, if you will. It wouldn't have been a cut, but there would have been less of an increase, if you will. I believe we'll have to go back to the drawing board and look at one of those options. I think the first one would be very valid. Let's go back to that revenue neutral $500 million plan, and then let's go through the budget and try to see where we can have cuts to build upon it.
Well, that and the overall settlement of the budget before June 30 to take care of and then plan for next year, all these things that will be going on. Some of that work slowed a bit with a recess, but picking up in earnest afterwards. We appreciate your time in addressing all of those concerns, and we'll watch the progress moving forward.
Thank you much. It's been an honor to be here, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks very much. And thank you for your time and attention. We've been speaking with Representative Tom Leonard, a Republican who represents District 93 in Clinton and Gratiot counties. Remember the repeat broadcast of this program coming up Saturday evening at 6:30 and a week from today for you early morning folks at 5 a.m. You can check those listings on our website at WCMU.org. And as well there, you'll find the page when you click on the TV tab to the local productions and Capital Report for the programs as we post them online. This program will be joining that list shortly. As always, thanks for your time and attention. We will talk again.
You've been watching Capital Report. Join us again as your elected officials speak to your concerns on current issues.